The cross ruling, because we don't give the AI cross rulings. That's totally so. When the AI comes out with the same logic in a cross ruling, it just feels like Christmas.
Before we get started with the show, here's a quick word from our sponsor, Global Training Center. As trade compliance professionals, you want to make sure that your procedures and documentation are completed as correctly as possible to avoid any delays and possible fines. We provide a range of trade compliance courses that will fit your needs. From in-person or web training to recorded on-demand courses, we can train one or even thousands on your team through your learning platform or on our portal. We can even customize a private session for your team. Go to globaltrainingcenter.com to find out more.
Hey, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us here at the podcast. So we're about a couple of weeks away from returning from ICPA. We're a week away from going to NCBFAA. Kind of like what people like to coin as a conference season, or one of them anyway, because later in the year there's another wave of conferences for international trade. But for us right now, we're in the midst of it. So back at ICPA, I did meet a couple of guys that I decided to. I asked them on the podcast for several reasons. I was really impressed by their technology. They have a really cool tool that they developed, and we'll let them talk a little bit about that here in a little bit. Let me just tell you and introduce you to these two guys. Hal Berman, who is a co-founder, and so is John Petitte. And so they're both co-founders, and they're two of three founders of this company called Trade Insight AI. So Trade Insight, again, what they do is mostly the tariff classification and just going around and looking at how to classify your products. A lot of what we used to do on the legacy software, but it was mostly manual, and then we just enter the tariff number. But hey, Hal and John, thank you for joining us, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having us. It's an honor to be here, and it was great meeting you at ICPA, and it's a real privilege to talk to you about such an exciting time to be discussing trade.
It is. Hey, John, so how you been?
Good. I mean, one thing that I have to say is maybe 2 months ago, Hal actually came to me and he said, hey, there's this podcast called Simply Trade, and it's the biggest podcast in trade. I need to figure out how to meet these guys. I'd love to be on it and chalk with them. And here we are today doing exactly that and having a good time.
Awesome. How funny. You manifested it, Hal. It's weird because it's you just never know who you run into at ICPA. And I always tell people, I mean, even here on the show, I always tell them, if you all ever run into us, it doesn't matter where. I mean, I doubt anybody's going to run into me at the grocery store, at the airport or something. Well, maybe at the airport if we're traveling from a conference, but really, like, just come up to me or Andy or Anik or really anyone here at Global Training Center and let us know, that you want to come on, let us hear your story a little bit, and we'll definitely bring you on. I mean, that's how easy it was with Hal and John. And by the way, they were telling me how, like, the stress level might be high when they're coming on the podcast. And then as we started working through the process and everything, they're like, oh, this is nothing, So really, guys, and if you're afraid of coming on the podcast because of, oh, I'm going to be on camera, I'm going to be grilled or whatever, it's nothing like that. I mean, it's literally, I told John and Hal, pretend we were still at that little mixer that we had, or a networking session, because that's all we're going to do is just talk. I don't even know if we even discussed what we were going to talk about today. So, so we'll figure it out as we go along. So, and oh, by the way, and Andy is supposed to be here. He may be having technical issues or not, but he will hopefully join us here in a little bit. So, and I do want John and Hal to also meet Andy, and of course Andy to meet you guys. But so guys, so what's going on in the trade world here for you guys? And what are you seeing? What do you? By the way, Hal is more of the compliance in the company, and then I'll let you all explain that. And John is more the techie. He's I don't know, if you're officially CTO or just co-founder or what, but he would be equivalent of a CTO. Whereas Hal, he's an attorney. He knows tariff and trade and classifications and all that. And it's a really interesting backstory. But anyway, we'll let them tell us about that.
Yeah. So I kind of grew up in trade. My parents worked for customs at JFK. That's how they met. My dad went and co-founded a brokerage company called Agri Services at JFK in 1983. And they're still around. And at 13 years old, he started bringing me into the office saying, this is a 7501. Here's how you fill out an entry. Here's how you do a truck seal. And, I was part of the business the rest of my life and kind of was addicted. So I took the broker's exam in college and then went to law school and it's like, I'm going to be a trade attorney. Came out of law school and ended up consulting, and all I've done for the last 11 years has been classification projects. Really large data, 10,000 SKUs was the smallest project I would do. And it was so exciting for me because I just loved classification. But about 8 years ago, I went to John and said, there's got to be a way to use machine learning to do this better. There has to be. And John said, sure, we can do it.
Hal, a couple notes in the story. One, your dad gave you an ultimatum, right? He said, hey, look, if you pass the broker's licensing exam, you can do whatever you want. And so you did it, and you still ended up in trade. And then Hal and I met back in 2010 for the first time in Japan when we were studying abroad, and we were just sat beside each other in Japanese class over there. And I remember distinctly we were chatting. We were like, hey, we should start a company someday. And then it was, maybe 8 years later is when you came back to me and said, hey, I'm in this thing called trade compliance. And there's a lot of need for technology help there. And then almost 10 years after that is when the real opportunities started to come about that we saw and kick things off. So it's been an interesting journey, I'd say, for both of us.
Well, it's really I guess as we talked about it, and I'll use my my director's cut here a little bit, but when we were talking back in Orlando, it was really interesting how John, you took a shot at it, at doing some kind of a tool for classification several years back, but it just wasn't coming along like you thought. Maybe I understood the story wrong or something. But then as soon as AI came out, like in the last 2 years, it just exploded, correct?
Yeah, the technology wasn't there. I mean, there have been large companies trying to use technology to support classification for a while, right? And it's really a semantic problem. And so then when transformer models were finally, let's say, invented or discovered, whatever you want to say there, in the famous paper, I think it was called All You Need Is a Little Attention, which is a classic computer science title to a paper, right? And I think that was in 2017. That suddenly made it possible to tackle semantic problems using AI really, really, really effectively, more than anything else. And so when we chat in the community, we talk about how it wasn't really in 2017 where everybody understood what was coming. Like the paper was released and everybody said, oh, this is interesting. It's pretty cool. Let's keep rolling with it. And nobody really knew that at a certain point in the training process where you get a certain number of parameters, it's like an inflection point where magic starts to look like it's occurring, right? Where you start to get things that look like understanding. And so when that occurred, that nobody expected, that's when it became really, really interesting to start to apply it to problems like law or trade or instances where you have lots and lots and lots of documentation just that are all semantic association challenges.
So that's interesting. And then, oh, by the way, when I first met these guys, I first met John because Hal was at a different get together that evening, and he came in and introduced himself, and I just couldn't stop but laugh and see the irony behind his name and the company he runs. And I'll let you guys figure that one out. But but anyway, that's a perfect name for what the company you started here. But anyway. So Hal, I also liked, and I thought it was interesting how not interesting, but it was a great story how your dad, the very first stuff he made you classify, I think you'd say you were like 15, 16 years old. He threw the tariff, the HTS at you, and then threw some garments at you and said, classify these, right?
Yeah. So at Agri Services, they have 6 very, very, very large apparel clients who are like 40% of the business, and he was dedicated to supporting them at the highest level. And the idea that like if I couldn't classify apparel, I would never have a home there. And if I could start learning by classifying apparel, everything else in the HTS would be easy. So I had no idea when I was reading these informed compliance publications, and quota was still really big in apparel, and there's all of these rules. And at 16 years old, I just thought everything was that hard. And it wasn't until I moved past apparel that I realized, wow, this is way harder. And years later, he still gives me a hard time about the shoe classifications I was doing. It's like, yeah, there's people who've been doing it for decades that I was expecting you to be able to audit their work. Yeah, it's a pretty cruel prank to play on a 16-year-old. For anybody out there who's done apparel and particularly footwear classifications, you know exactly what I mean. For anybody who hasn't, take a look through those chapters sometimes.
That and chemicals, I guess, right?
Yeah, the chemicals is a whole different level of expertise and overwhelming for different reasons. But the apparel classifications, particularly as a 16-year-old, I didn't know anything about women's fashion. I didn't know, all these terms.
You don't know what an espadrille is, Hal?
No, I had no idea what an espadrille was. The difference between a sweater and an anorak, I had no concept whatsoever. I wasn't even buying my own clothes at 16. So, it was real valuable experience. And I am very grateful that he threw me into the deep end on that, because by the time I got to the broker's exam, the classification questions weren't stressing me out.
So Hal, what do you think is harder, chemical or apparel?
Apparel.
Interesting.
Is it really? Yeah.
I think if you went to, the big apparel companies, they just do so many different things, and you can see hundreds of thousands of SKUs with different classifications. And in the chemical, it's fewer SKUs, fewer variety. A lot of companies specialize, so you get more domain knowledge, and you're not dealing with one shipment with, 30 different headings. So I've always found apparel much more challenging and more fun. But
would you say chemical, the main challenge is nomenclature? The fact that you can have, multiple
it's just
or
harder
complex.
to get time with a chemical engineer to explain some of these things. So if the person classifying isn't a chemical engineer, there's so much knowledge transfer that needs to happen. And that's a big stumbling block.
And I neglected to mention that my original degree was chemical engineering, actually. So, and reading through the chemical section of the HTS is still very challenging for me.
So I did. I guess one of the items that we were talking about is how we can connect a lot of what's going on today with flat out with tariffs. I mean, that's the big That's unless you've been sleeping for the last 3 or 4 months, that's literally what's a lot of what's going on today. How? I mean, I guess, Hal, you being the attorney and understanding, the laws, rules, and regulations behind this, how important or how much more important is it today to have your products classified correctly versus what, in the past, I guess, how it's been in the past? I mean, I know you always have to have the right classification, don't get me wrong. But how critical, or have you seen with your clients or anybody maybe reaching out to you all, or even at ICPA? Because, I mean, that's a perfect sounding board for your product, or testing ground, for your product. Because, I mean, you had nearly 1,000 people there attending and kind of shooting and throwing things at you. But what are you seeing on that? Like, what are the trends that you're seeing on people who need to classify, and how much are they weighing that now more than before, or are they,
We're kind of at this conflux of these two big things: more tariffs that stack on certain HTS numbers, and more of a push from CBP and from the federal government to use technology to have enhanced screening and enforcement. So 2.5 years ago, when John and I first started going to market with, hey, we built a research tool that helps you do 50 classifications in the time it takes you to do 5. And people were like, oh, that's very interesting, but we don't have enough of a need for it. And then the conversations changed massively since January, where people who were interested and polite and would listen to what we were doing suddenly start reaching out saying, we'd love a pilot. We'd love to see 200 classifications. We'd love to understand, because their leadership had always looked at compliance as a cost factor, a secondary function, something that had to be done, but was never something at the front of their mind. Suddenly, every CEO, every CFO, all of these executive leaders are going to their compliance teams and saying, hey, do these new tariffs apply to us? And they say, yes, they do, or they don't, or many of them are saying, we're not sure. And suddenly all of this extra focus is on classification to determine what tariffs apply, and think, hey, if we've been misclassifying, maybe we shouldn't be paying 301 duties. Maybe the steel and aluminum don't apply. Let's double check our classifications. So as a tool designed to help humans audit classifications, the demand has been beyond anything John and I ever expected. It's a totally different environment now than it was 4 months ago.
One thing that's interesting to me as an outsider, right? I'm not a trade expert. I'm an engineer. That's my background. And when we started talking about this, and I'm learning about classification, okay, it's important, right? You need to know what you are classifying it as so you can pay duty and properly bring it into the U.S., et cetera. One thing that I didn't anticipate was how fundamental classification is to just about everything else in trade compliance, right? Like, if you get that wrong when you're bringing it into the U.S., like, duty drawback is a problem. Like, everything becomes a problem if you get that wrong, which was not something that I was expecting when I first started to learn about trade compliance. But it's been fascinating to see that. And obviously with the tariff changes, it's doubly critical, right? Because they're so connected together. You have to know what you're bringing in so that you know what you're paying, right? And you need to know where you get it from, et cetera. So that's been kind of interesting. It makes sense once you get deep down into it, but people who are not in the trade compliance industry do not understand that at all. They have no concept of how critical it is.
It is fascinating, Lalo, to talk about changing attitudes. When we first were showing what we could do and we were trying to raise money and looking for investors, as soon as I start explaining what an informed compliance publication is or cross rulings, sorry, I've got a cat that's trying to get in here. As soon as we were talking to these investors who were not trade experts about HTS classification and tariffs, you could see on their faces that just we totally lost them because they hadn't heard of tariffs. They hadn't really been tied in to caring about HTS codes. Now, all of a sudden, we have venture capitalists and investors who are interested in demos and seeing what we can do because their whole circle is talking about tariffs. And it's on the forefront of so many business leaders and investors' minds. And when they go and look for, well, what's a way to leverage newest technology, there hasn't really been that many other companies pushing to do just classification. And it's honestly been an incredible journey. This last few months have really changed everything for our business. I'm not consulting full time anymore and just working on Trade Insight AI full time. And even at ICPA, we had a live demo there. We were expecting to do maybe 50 classifications. We had 200 people throw classifications at us, and we were thinking we'd get maybe 75% of them right. We got 100% of them right, and kind of totally changed the tenor of the conversation.
One thing we were chatting about this morning was about getting the word out, right? So most people who are not in trade compliance, even importers, don't know the importance of this step in reference to all the changes that are taking place. We just had a conversation, I think it was yesterday, Hal, with somebody who, was using the wrong HTS code, right? And you talk with startups all the time. They have no concept of the importance of this. They think that, well, DHL gave me a number, right? FedEx gave me a number. They know what they're doing. It's right. It's like, no, they don't actually care about you, right? They're giving you a number just so that you can use them to get it into the country. We've had folks chat with us and say, oh, yeah, the company I'm buying it from says it's this code. It's like, that's not how it works. Like, they don't care about you. They're just choosing a code to get you to buy, right? So I don't have a solution to this, but particularly with the new tariffs that are probably coming out today, I wonder how do you get the word out to everybody this matters to, right? Which is a huge swath of the population that had no idea that this is something they need to even care about, but they will. Hal, you were talking about how many importers are going to go out of business because they don't know the changes are taking place. They don't know the criticality of their classifications. And in 2 months, they're suddenly going to get hit with a giant bill, right? With 20% more than what they were anticipating, and they're running on 2 to 5% margin. I think that's going to be a big problem for a lot of people.
With what you've got, I guess my question is going to be too, you had a fantastic demo apparently in Orlando, right? What do you think prompted the accuracy when you're saying 100%? You had 200 classifications and you got them all right. What information was being supplied, I guess, that allowed your system to generate such an accurate rating?
Yeah, so one of the things that was critical when I set out to build this, because my background is looking at hundreds of thousands of SKUs in a 6-month period, and the biggest issue is the information gaps. You see the product description and it says aluminum powder coating or whatever the product description is, where it's not enough to do a full classification from that small product description. So when we designed this system, we wanted it to be the starting point for research to help humans. We've 100% are open with the fact that you cannot fire people by using our product. All our product does is let trained classifiers classify more, faster, accurately. And a big part of that is when there's an information gap, our system, using all of this black box magic, AI, is able to look at a term, let's say a polymer name, that a broker might not know that polymer's chemical classification off the top of their head. The AI is able to do that and then fill in the gaps. Great example were pipettes, glass pipettes used in vitro fertilization. The AI doesn't need to pick up the phone and call the importer to say, what type of glass is this made from, which is a critical part of information for Chapter 70, heading 7017, to determine the 6-digit code you need to know what type of glass. The AI is able to assume that it's this type of glass called borosilicate because the AI knows that's what 90% of laboratory glassware is made from. And those assumptions filling in the blanks are really what reduces the amount of times you have to pick up the phone and call the importer and ask, hey, what's the final end use? Is this pipette going to be used in a surgery or is it laboratory? Those types of questions, reducing those questions is one of the biggest advantages. And that's really those assumptions and being able to fill in the blanks is how we were able to be so accurate. A lot of it too is people would throw difficult classifications to us, things that were composite goods, things that had foreign language elements, chemical compositions, incomplete data, because they knew that that's what their company had struggled with. And the AI is very, very good with certain things that people struggle with, like memorizing the explanatory notes. Not a single trade compliance professional out there can immediately recall every single explanatory note. It's child's play for the AI to see, hey, what are all the explanatory notes for this chapter? What are all the chapter notes? What exclusions apply? And go through these in seconds. That, everyone here who's ever classified, the amount of time it takes to read every chapter note, every section note, to figure out if there's an exclusion and every explanatory note, we just can't do that if we're trying to do 10 classifications in an hour.
So my wife has this really cool app on her phone, and she loves gardening. She loves plants. She loves trees. She loves all that nature stuff. And it comes in handy like when we're out for a walk or visiting like my daughter or my son out in California, and we see these trees or plants that we really like. Takes a picture and it tells you everything there is to know about that plant. I mean, it tells you, or tree or bush or whatever. It tells you like if it can grow like in our region and here in West Texas, which is very arid. Like it's supposed to, and I never really tried it. I'm sure she has, where it takes a picture of the plant and tells you if it's sick or how to fix it. Does it need more water, less water, throw something in it so it can make it healthier or whatever. So the what I saw, and I haven't seen yet on anybody's other demos that they may claim to be doing the same, is with theirs is the same thing with Trade Insight. You give it a picture and it pretty darn almost nails it. I mean, it's crazy how it can tell if it's wool versus polyester, I guess, and stuff like that. That's really cool. John, I don't know how you managed to get that, but I mean, it's to me, I see that a big difference there or differentiator on how to get to that product as well.
Yeah, that was pretty neat when we finally made that happen, particularly with apparel, right? Where, again, this is all new to me, but, somebody classifying a shoe told me that they actually couldn't classify that shoe until they looked at a picture to figure out how it was put together. And then they could do the classification, right? Like written down, it wasn't enough information, percentages of materials weren't right, and so this individual like always asked for pictures of the items. And, opening that up to the system to be able to do that was pretty neat. We really enjoyed that.
And even like as an apparel background, stitch count on sweaters, is a big one. You need to have certain amount of stitches per square centimeter. If the importer doesn't tell the broker or the classifier the stitch count, you can't do the classification. It's as simple as that. With the picture, the AI is able to very accurately estimate the stitch count. And what we also like is, even though it's estimating the stitch count, it's not just giving the final result. It's printing in the research report, the output, we're assuming based on the picture, a stitch count of, whatever per square centimeter, so that the person reviewing it, they say, no, that's totally wrong. They can fix that there. But already the person reviewing our output now knows that stitch count matters. And that's kind of the big thing that I wanted from the beginning, is by just looking at the assumptions, even if we get it wrong, you should be able to be more confident with your classification by reviewing the output. And that's kind of where we're at. I know you had a second part of your question, Andy, and I didn't want to.
That's where I was just getting ready for it. Thank you. The second part of that is you were talking about like the explanatory notes and all. It sounds like you have developed your system. Lots of folks have their systems that are doing the classification and whatnot. Sounds like yours is able to actually use logic in going through the explanatory notes and the chapter notes and things of that nature to actually make some assessments if there is shall we say, an exception. It's validating, is there an exception that applies to this or not? So is that pretty valid, Vigat? And in doing so, have you just basically downloaded from CBP the full tariff and with all the notes, obviously?
Yeah, so we have a lot of information in the background that we're passing through to the AI, getting the system to think systematically, step by step, and then share each step so that you could go, or somebody with very little classification experience can follow the steps and say, yeah, I agree with all this logic, and I'm going to go and check the explanatory notes. I'm going to check the section notes where it said, and yep, everything, I agree with it, is a big difference than a system that says, here's what we think the final classification is.
You've got a product now that's it's like, okay, you've convinced me it is it's valid. I can run my parts database through it and get whatever levels that you're talking about. This is what I want to use. What are the system requirements of a business to utilize your system?
Yeah, it's a great question. We are at a stage with our business where all of our clients so far, whatever they've needed, we are able to develop something that's going to work for them. John, he's got another company called Amplify Labs that's a full service development shop, and we build everything in-house. So if your part database lives on an Excel spreadsheet, no problem. Send us a spreadsheet. We'll send you back classifications with links to the rationales. If you are in an ERP that outputs as a JSON, like an Oracle GTM, no problem. Give us the JSON. We'll run it from that. The basic thing is, even if you just have commercial invoices as PDFs and you want to send us the PDFs, we'll do the work to rip out the product descriptions from the PDFs and return a spreadsheet. So we're at a stage in the business that anybody who wants to be, doing 1,000 classifications and up will find a way for their data to work with our system. A good way is just explaining in a case study. Somebody came to us and said, we want our engineers to be able to provide what they think the final product is going to be 60 days before shipment, and just email the product details to, as a PDF or as an output from a CAD drawing to an email. And then the engineers get back what we think the classification is and all the assumptions to validate. And then that goes to the trade ops team, automated system built, entirely by us. And then when it gets put on for first entry and it's coming in, our system communicates with their ERP. They see this has not been entered before. It does a same day classification. If those two classifications don't match up, the 60 days before, it's 6 days, and then time of import, that triggers an email to the head of trade ops saying, hey, figure out why these two don't match. And that's connecting straight from their ERP and to their email server. So we built that totally for them as part of their workflow. So they get 2 bites at the apple, and it automatically flags things that don't match.
Assumedly, your system's going to be getting probably daily updates, if not multiple updates throughout the day, if that is available. I don't know on that one, but with that, are you able to take those daily updates, I guess, and keep your system as accurate as possible? Because everybody's struggling with that right now.
And we use all the most up-to-date government documentation available.
John devised a solution really early on to make sure that we don't miss anything, because 2 years ago, I was like, this code doesn't exist. And he's like, it has to exist. The AI wouldn't have said. And then, sure enough, a change had happened a couple days, prior, and we weren't updating every single day. So John developed a solution, implemented it, and now every single day we update and see if there's any changes. And we pull that, because you're absolutely right. People can't be looking at tomorrow with Monday's, codes.
Well, it sounds like you got a lot on your plate already, and just refining it. I guess, John, as you've looked at what I'm sure Hal's been saying, well, it's the data. We got to classify it step 1, 2, 3, 4, all these kinds of things. You're in the background there of pulling everything together. I'm sure it is very satisfying to get close to this, and then maybe even frustrating to try and, wait a minute, we got to keep refining it a little bit more before we kick it out there. But what about from your perspective here on all the work that you've done?
My philosophy that I tell myself every day is I want to have the best classification system on the planet. That's it. That is our reason to exist. That is why we get up every day. That is why we're building things. And in the end, that means that the work is not going to stop, right? We've built many, many different engines for classification. We currently have 3 that we're going to release with our version 1 API, but that's not the end, right? We're going to have more engines because we can always be better, right? And we want to be the best. So, I don't think about it in terms of how much work has been done. It's just an ongoing process that will always happen. Usually our conversations around, hey, was this classification right? And Hal says no. And then we go through it, and it's so complicated as to why it's not right or it is right that I just say, all right, I got it. And then I just move on. I don't even try and memorize it, right? I'm just like, okay, I'll let Boolean functions take that place in my brain instead of the classification text.
Years of 4 hours a day, essentially meetings, working on this, while both of us having full-time jobs outside of this. And it's been amazing to teach somebody as smart as John classification, and then to figure out, okay, why does this not work? Like, it should work. We gave it everything it needs. Why does this not work? And then sometimes we've been stuck on single classifications, like dog salmon. The AI was calling dog salmon dog food for like 6 weeks. We couldn't figure out why is dog salmon, which has its own, it's in the tariff, plain as day, dog salmon. Can it not get this idea that canned dog salmon is not salmon made into dog food? And John, never gave up on that. I'll tell you, in these past 2.5 years, there are times when I said, AI is never going to be able to do this. You're just never going to be able to do it. And was totally ready to quit and just find more consulting gigs and never think about AI again. And John just like, no, we'll get there.
Well, one of the most fascinating things to me that popped up when we knew that we turned a corner was Hal would do some classifications, and then we'd run them through the AI, and then we'd look at him and be like, oh, I got it wrong. And then Hal would read through the rationale from the AI, and he'd be like, oh, actually, I was wrong. This is right. And that started to happen a lot.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
I've done over 500,000 classifications in the last 11 years. And clients like me. I'm asked to come back to do annual audits. I've done, never had somebody say, oh, your classifications are bad. So I thought I'd be able to do better than the AI. And when the AI started showing me that I was wrong, that was really the moment where I was like, okay, now we're ready to show people. It's time for me to go to the big clients I've had in the past and can show them, hey, the cross ruling, because we don't give the AI cross rulings. That's totally. So when the AI comes out with the same logic in a cross ruling, it just feels like Christmas.
I love that. Any last notes for anybody here that you want to talk to as far as your, say, for example, the executives of a company? What should they be? What would be the key question? One or two questions that, let's say, a CEO or CFO or somebody like that, what should they be asking to get to drive this down to the compliance area to say, hey?
So on the compliance side, the key questions are really around, is this a solution for a problem we actually have? Instead of, is it just the next hot thing? Because it is plenty of companies, they don't have a classification problem. They do a few things. They don't need AI involved. So that's a big one. Is this a solution for a problem we actually have? And two, is the solution trying to do one thing? Or is it saying we're going to revolutionize your thing and making really broad claims? Because AI right now is really good at doing certain specific things. As soon as you're trying to use it to answer all of your problems or reduce headcount, and lose sight of the fact that this is still a very new technology that you can't just let wild, that's a big question. Is this solution trying to do more than one thing? Those are the big questions on my mind. John might be able to speak on AI in general because he's developed AI tools.
Yeah, I'd say the number one thing executives need to think about is, where have productivity gains already been realized using AI? The number one place that I've seen that is in the developer community. So software developers have already worked out pretty solid paradigms on how do you 10x your workflow using some type of AI. And the rest of the world is going to go through that transition at various points in time where you realize, oh, this is my workflow on how I use this AI tool to 10x my productivity. That will 100% occur in each industry. If you're not sure, if you can't visualize how that's going to occur in your industry, reach out to another developer who's already been through that phase. You could talk to us too, and I can tell you about how we have implemented in the software development side. But use that experience from individuals who have already walked their industry through that transition to visualize how your industry will walk through that transition. That analogous transition, I think, will be extremely valuable to executives who want an insight into what it's going to look like for their company.
It's been a great discussion. I want to know a little bit further down the road here, maybe 6 months or so, we may need to look at doing an update or a follow-up, because as we're going through with all these changes and all these things going on with the U.S. and other countries in their trade battles and saber rattling and all that kind of stuff, it's just it's really interesting to see what's happening. So really appreciate it. But with that, I guess we need to wrap this up. John, Hal, what a great discussion. You guys were fantastic. You got a great product. So tradeinsightai.com. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Lalo. Thanks, Andy. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest in the show or would like to sponsor Simply Trade or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, entertainment purposes only and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.